Future of Donald Trump's presidency. My colleague Mike Walter is now in Washington with more. Mike, hello there.
Hi there. It's just after 10 p.m. here in Washington, D.C. Polls closed in all but 4 U.S. states for this important midterm election. Let's update a couple of the big races that we've been watching in the U.S. Senate. In Tennessee, Republican Marsha Blackburn is set to win a U.S. Senate seat. This is an open seat. Bob Corker retiring. She's projected to beat Democratic challenger Phil Bredesen by a wide margin. Now to Indiana, Republican Mike Braun has unseated Democrat Joe Donnelly in that state. Democrats hoping to hold that state. They did not. Now these results, along with the vote counts coming in from other states, are offering us a glimpse of voter sentiment in the country. This midterm election widely seen as a referendum on the Trump administration. CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. Starting off our coverage, it could be a long night for the president and his party in many respects, right, Nathan?
Yeah, although it's starting to take shape. It looks like, from the map that we're seeing at the moment, that the Democrats are basically going to do enough to take control of the House of Representatives. That's not a definite yet, but here at the White House, we just heard from Sarah Sanders. We should be getting the tape soon. She was basically suggesting that that looked like the most likely scenario, and even mentioned working with Democrats potentially on infrastructure, and talked a little bit about immigration as well. She called it a blue ripple, meaning not the blue wave that everyone had been talking about in terms of Democrats, but it does look like they are picking up enough seats as all those polls close and the counts get counted from east to west on the U.S., although the majority that the Democrats will have in the House of Representatives remains to be seen. But as yet, that is not 100% certainty. We are not calling it. We're just saying that they are on track to do so. When it comes to the Senate, everyone knew the Democrats had a very, very tough job to do that. It doesn't look like they're going to do it. In fact, it looks like the Republicans will probably increase their majority, which was just 2 seats in the 100-seat chamber, a squeaker in Florida, which is still being counted in the Senate and the governor's race, putting everyone on tenterhooks, as well as Texas, a huge state and a Republican state. But Beto O'Rourke really challenging Ted Cruz, who ran for president in the primaries against Donald Trump, and Trump has been stumping for him, but that is a squeaker as well. So some amazing results, some incredible upsets as well, but it looks like, for now at least, all the predictions that we've been seeing over the last couple of months are going to bear that out, where the Democrats most likely take control of the House of Representatives and the Republicans hold on to the Senate with a increased slightly majority. What does that mean? Well, it means essentially that we'll get more gridlock in Washington. That's not necessarily a bad idea where the country is so split, but Donald Trump will find it harder to get his legislative agenda through the House. And of course, Democrats would have subpoena and investigative powers against this White House as well, which could cause him problems going into the 2020 election as well. But this is not a terrible result for the president. Everywhere he campaigned, it looks like that a lot of the Senate candidates that he was looking to help have succeeded. So he will claim that small victory, even if the Republicans lose control of the House. Mike.
And he's been very, very busy, as you well know. He endorsed close to 100 candidates, held dozens of campaign rallies right down to the wire. Talk to us about the power of Trump in this election, because it's not just that he managed to get his base out. He also energized a lot of Democrats who don't like him.
Exactly. We're seeing both the good and the bad side of a potential presidential renomination race in 2020. He polarizes people like never before. And, you know, people were talking about a blue wave, to leave the Senate. No. What this election looks like it's going to be is to show that the U.S. is more divided than it's ever been before. And that basically it just takes a few hundred votes in each district, some of these districts, to actually move the needle. So even though he may have energized his base, like you said, with wedge issues like immigration and going after Democrats personally, he may have turned off some of those key voters that could have potentially kept control of the House as well. So the jury will be out, not just in terms of the media and everyone analyzing these results, but also in the Republicans looking to keep the presidency in 2020 as well. let's see the final results. This is still early days, but this is a very different Washington if the Democrats take control of the House that the U.S. president will wake up to when he does. Of course, that may require a little bit of calibration on his part, recalibration. He's already hinted that perhaps his language shouldn't have been so divisive over the last couple of years. Are we looking at a new Donald Trump that's going to try and compromise ahead of his re-election bid? All this to be announced, but it's going to be very, very interesting. And internationally, of course, this does have repercussions as well. If Donald Trump calms it down at home, will he do so abroad as well?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. Nathan King at the White House. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, here's where things currently stand in Congress. Republicans have a majority in both the House and the Senate. Democrats need to pick up 23 seats to take control of the House. As Nathan pointed out, U.S. television networks are projecting they are likely on their way to that goal. Now, they would need to pick up 2 more seats in the Senate to win a majority there. That looks increasingly less likely as the night progresses. Now, there are some key state-level races attracting attention in the United States. In Georgia, history will be made if Democrat Stacey Abrams wins her race. If she defeats Republican Brian Kemp, Abrams will become the first black female governor in the United States. It's a close race. In a traditional Republican stronghold, that one is too close to call at this stage. In Florida, Andrew Gilliam is trying to become the state's first African-American governor. He's the mayor of Florida's capital, Tallahassee. He's up against Ron DeSantis, a Republican and former congressman. Right now, that one also too close to call. Very close race indeed. With me here in the studio, Atiba Mayoun. He's president and founder of Party Politics US. Let's start there. I mean, Georgia, the lines hours long for people wanting to vote. They had to keep the polls open late. I think the same in Florida. Very, very close races. Give me your sense of what you're seeing in Georgia and also in Florida. It's also a very close Senate race as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying social media is amazing because I'll tell you that the things that we've been seeing with Stacey Abrams, with Andrew Gilliam, and how they have activated and been able to get not just celebrities, elected officials, but people on the ground who are excited, who are ready to vote, who are early voting. I mean, we've seen the numbers right now in terms of turnout has been off the chain. I mean, it's just something that we haven't seen in the last few election cycles. So the excitement, I think, you know, it may have something to do with the fact that there are 2 African Americans that are on the ballot, both in Georgia and Florida. But I also think that a lot of it has to do with the rhetoric and people who really wanted to see, unfortunately, as Nathan mentioned, that there's this blue ripple and maybe not this blue wave. But I think that the excitement that we see is indicative of the feeling of the country and that people want to push back on this idea of division and fear.
The other thing that might be interesting, I think, is the Texas Senate race, where Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz just neck and neck at this stage. And to think that a Democrat might actually have a chance of winning Texas, that would have been unthinkable. If he were to win, that might be one of the biggest stories of the night, right?
Yeah, everybody keeps talking about him as like a rock star. You know, and he's gone around the state. He's gone to every single county in Texas. And, you know, depending on what part of the state you talk to people there, there's some people who feel that maybe he has a chance to win. But, yeah, Beto's opportunity there, especially challenging Ted Cruz, and the fact that they're going neck and neck and that we may be up late into the night trying to figure out exactly who won, that's pretty exciting to watch right now.
What about star power? Taylor Swift came out for the candidate in Tennessee. He lost. You see Oprah Winfrey came out with for Stacey Abrams in Georgia. That one's still up in the air. But you see Obama here. You see Trump there. I mean, what influence did they have in this election?
I think they've played a big role at this. I felt like watching President Obama out there on the campaign trail that it became like this pitting of fear versus hope. It was like hope and change was the president's message. This current president seems to be fear and division. But we're not talking enough about, I think, voter suppression. And I think that's the greatest fear that a lot of Democrats, and tomorrow morning, I think we're going to be talking about, you know, when we look at Georgia and the fact that their Secretary of State is running for governor, and there have been a number of key issues. I mean, he's blamed the Democratic Party for hacking into their computer systems. There's been a large number of people that have been taken off the voter rolls. I think there's a really big issue that what would happen if we got to play this game and it was all fair. I mean, in Texas, you mentioned with Beto O'Rourke, we're looking at a state that has ranked over the last few years 49th and 50th in terms of voter turnout. And there's been a great deal of voter suppression that's there. So it's going to be interesting to see not only these numbers that come in, but what's going to happen when people are talking about, well, I went to the poll, I voted straight ticket, for instance, what we've heard in Texas, but yet I thought by voting straight ticket that was going to be a vote for Beto O'Rourke, but it switched my ticket to Ted Cruz, who wasn't a Democrat. And so across the board, those are the type of things I think we need to pay attention to.
And it's interesting you bring up voter suppression, which has been an issue leading up to today, but also in some states we're seeing problems where the machines are malfunctioning, lots of issues, you know, and going back to the presidential race where they were talking about perhaps Russian interference. It seems like, you know, we're still seeing a lot of issues dating back, of course, to Bush versus Gore and the hanging Chads. When do you think the U.S. is going to get their act together when it comes to elections?
I was going to mention, so it's funny because back in 2000, 2002, I was working on the legislation in the states that led to the Help America Vote Act. And there was a Voter Bill of Rights that was issued. But that is where we started talking about electronic voting machines. And it's funny now that we look almost 20 years later, the fact that we are talking about hacking, we're talking about people who are saying that their votes aren't being counted or machines that aren't working. But also, there's another question, too. I was talking to someone from Maryland today who said, I stood in line for over almost 2 hours to vote because in their voting precinct, there were only 2 voting booths, knowing that there was a large number of people that were voting. We're talking about, look at Florida right now. We look at Georgia. There are people that are still standing in line. The polls closed at 8 o'clock. You know, you would think that in this world that we would have figured out some other ways that voting, either we have it as a national election day, other countries have that we make it that it's mandatory so we can get the numbers up higher, but more so that we make it so that it's easier for people to vote as opposed to making it harder.
Let's talk about a couple of these races that aren't going to get the marquee coverage that some of these other races. Jared Polis, governor candidate in Colorado. He won, first openly gay governor in the United States. You have your first Muslim woman elected in the state of Minnesota. You have a Native American Democrat in Kansas, big red state, winning there. What about these firsts? Well,
the day after President Trump won, I kind of looked at it and thought, okay, this isn't necessarily, as some people thought, a bad thing. I looked at it and said, this is an opportunity for this country to come together. And I think that what we've seen in gains, and you know, the president is great at messaging. And his Make America Great Again slogan, while it may not be a slogan that some that are opposed to his presidency like, in a sense, this country is becoming better. And it's becoming better because we're looking at things outside of what we normally would within our communities. We're being more accepting of people who are gay and lesbian and of color, because if you look at Georgia, Florida, even Maryland, where you have Ben Jealous running for governor, the complexities of this country have always been difficult from our inception. Nothing ever has happened easy, whether or not it was civil rights or women's suffrage or ending slavery. So we've got to have to struggle to figure out how we find ways to compromise. But we're also going to have to find ways that we get to know one another better. And I think that's really what's happening.
Well, Tib, it's a pleasure having you in. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
We're going to send it back to Beijing. Li Dongning, it is going to be a long night here in the United States. A lot of these races still too close to call.
Thank you very much, Mike, for your report from Washington, D.C. Now, back here in the Beijing studio, let's talk to Mr. Edward Lehman for more analysis into the midterm elections in the U.S. He's a senior fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. First of all, a record turnout, this time much higher than the previous midterms in the U.S. Why?
Well, you know, I think it's a referendum on Trump, and this has been like 2 years culminating for the Democrats as far as voting against Mr. Trump's policies, and then Mr. Trump stumping to get the Republicans out to vote for his policies. And this is right, as you said, it's probably the biggest turnout in 50 years for midterms. Midterms are usually sluggish. The presidential election is not being decided at this point in time, and so a lot of people stay home. I also look at it as a lot of increase in technology. So people like myself who live abroad were able to vote more easily than we had before. And a lot of this is unintended consequences of the so-called tampering that went on in the last election, so they were ready for this year.
You voted in the embassy in Beijing, and it's interesting, you said you are a registered Democratic, but you voted for Republicans. Why?
I did. Well, you know, I think...
Are there many cases like you in the U.S., do you think?
You know, I think that there's been a lot of changing, and I think with my demographic, which is college-educated, people of Caucasian background. There's been a shifting with regards to what's happened with Mr. Trump and the promises. He certainly has been working very, very hard. I come from a traditionally Democratic city, which is the city of Chicago, and as I was saying off the air, was that we pretty much all registered as Democrats back then because they haven't elected a Republican mayor for 100 years now. So, and Mr. Trump at one point was a registered Democrat. But you're right. I think that there's been a big message and a big change and a big shift, and I think a lot of this is going to be happening and going to be an outcome tonight as to what the referendum is of the presidency.
So why you voted? Why did you vote for Republicans? Do you think they have done a great job in the past 2 years?
I think that what we have is a deadlock in Congress, and traditionally at the midterms that usually the ruling party loses their seats in Congress, and that's been every time since the Second World War. And I think that there's an opportunity now, I think a lot of people see, to have harmony maybe in the Congress, and I'm not sure that they're going to win. The Republicans will win the Congress. Certainly they look to win the Senate, but with the 435 seats that are up for grabs in the Congress, that might go Democrat. If they do, then we're going to have a definite friction between the Senate and the Congress to get laws and things passed. And as I told you before, what we're looking for is the help for the middle class, for the lower classes, for infrastructure, these kinds of things, and that's a real popular and resonates popular even for those of us who live abroad.
Well, this election actually will decide which party controls the Senate and the House. So no matter what the outcome will be, how will it influence Donald Trump and his strategy?
I think if he loses the House, there's going to be this movement to impeach or constrict the laws, policies, and regulations that they're trying to get passed. They've had a hard enough time now because the Republicans have not been unified even with the House and having control of the House and the Senate, and they haven't been able to build a wall. They haven't been able to pass a lot of laws, policies, and regulations. And so that they themselves are in a little bit of turmoil. I think that this would be a referendum if he could remain with the House and remain with the Senate, that there's a possibility the Trump agenda would go forward. If not, then there's going to be problems and there will be some infighting. So, how
about the bilateral relations between China and the U.S.? How will that be influenced by the change of hands in Senate and House?
Yeah, I think that China will remain a friend and has always remained a friend, and we're interlocked. I mean, the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy is interlocked, whether they say it or not. I think a lot of the noise Mr. Trump has been making has been to try to get a good position, but I don't think that's going to change this relationship between China and the United States. I think under the Obama administration, there was rocky. I think under the Trump administration, it's been mostly a lot of barbs, and there hasn't been a lot. There have been, the trade war has been instituted, but it hasn't been fully contemplated and followed through with yet. And I still think with the G20 coming up that there's a possibility some of this can be averted.
So you see the G20 meeting and special meeting between Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping will lead to a thaw of relations?
I think it's a great opportunity for communication. I think that the two gentlemen, Mr. Xi and President Trump, have a great personal relationship, and I think that Mr. Xi has showed himself as a global leader, and I think that the G20 is going to be a great opportunity. Mr. Trump has said, hey, I'd like to be a nationalist. I'm focusing on inwardly. Mr. Xi has been saying we're going to focus outwardly. I think Mr. Xi is going to be the winner in this from the world viewpoint, and I think he remains the winner in this. I think Mr. Trump remains the villain with all this kind of stuff, but it's popular for the U.S. elections.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Edward Lehman, Senior Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Thank you very much for your insight. And you're now watching World Today. Stay tuned with us for more updates. Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan says China is ready to hold discussions with the U.S.